Welcome to the Purposeful Sequencing Blueprint. I'm really glad that you're here, and I so appreciate your time and the dedication that you're putting into becoming a more effective teacher, even more than you already are, honing in on your skills and building up the tools that you need to sequence your classes in an impactful and an effective way. Now, one of the issues with sequencing that I'm sure you've probably faced is that there are just so many options. There are so many different ways that you can sequence a class. Now, what this blueprint is centered and focused on is sequencing that is very purposeful. And in order for the sequencing to be purposeful and not just filler, throwing in bits and pieces here and there, we need to first ask ourselves as teachers, why is it that I am sequencing something? What is it that I want to achieve from my sequencing and from my classes? What am I helping my students work towards? What am I helping them overcome? And what is it that I feel passionate about bringing and sharing, and how can that be reflected in my sequence? Now, I know from experience that it's easy to get shiny object syndrome, where we look at different sequencing ideas and suggestions. We see them all over social media, steal my flow and all these types of things. And while they can be very purposeful and beneficial, sometimes we get a little bit confused and we don't necessarily have the direction that we might need to discern and to really know what it is that is purposeful for our students and for the class that we would like to deliver. And this is why I want to talk about the idea of creative sequencing, or fancy type of sequencing, or more artistic sequencing. I know that there's a time and place for this type of thing, and I myself enjoy experiencing this and I enjoy teaching it. However, from what I have seen from most students, the benefits that they receive from their practice comes from sequencing that has more progressive purpose, more purpose for having your students be able to access a pose with more ease, creating sequences that are more inclusive, that are more introspective, that really encourage your students to do what it is that they came to do, which is on some level connect deeply enough to themselves to be able to generate a particular transformation. So while I really find that there's valuable components to creative, artistic, fancy sequencing and different transitions that are really fun to experiment with, and more of this play-based approach, I think it's incredibly important that as teachers we come back to looking at, well, what is it that's helping my students purposefully approach their practice so that they are able to deeper connect with themselves, to facilitate the transformation that they are seeking, to fulfill the purpose and the reason as to why they came to this practice in the first place. Now, there will be some students that really just like coming to classes that are for the purpose of just doing those fun, funky, creative, artistic classes, and there's nothing wrong with that. But from what I have seen and the teachers that I have mentored, the feedback has been that the most impactful way to sequence a class is really to do it from the lens and through that perspective of what is the most purposeful way to guide my students and sequence this class so that they are feeling successful, they are feeling confident, I'm feeling confident as a teacher, and the students are able, again, to connect deeply with themselves and their needs. Now, one final note that I want to make on this allure of looking at a really creative, funky, fun sequence and feeling the pull, again, that shiny object syndrome, like, oh, that looks like it's a lot of fun and should I be doing that, is where this actually can take on more of an entertainment purpose. Are you entertaining your students, or are you trying to get them to connect with themselves? Now, within this facet of let's entertain people, this is where we kind of get this shiny object syndrome, and we want to add variety, and we want to add this, and we want to do that. But sometimes within doing all those things, we lose the purpose, which is to help our students connect with themselves and generate that transformation that they're seeking. So sometimes when we try to add all these extra fancy creative things in, it actually becomes overstimulating. And what we're doing is we're perpetuating this need for something to constantly focus on and hold our attention and pull our attention and grab our attention, and something that again is just constantly stimulating. And I know that we definitely need to keep our students' attention, and we are observing as teachers where maybe our students have a tendency to check out. But again, that comes back to the very primary fundamental component that I mentioned in this blueprint of purposeful sequencing, which is to check in and ask why. Why am I sequencing my class in this particular way? What is the benefit of it for my students? How is that resonating with me and my values as a teacher? What is the purpose of my sequencing? And if you can really, truly have a look at that, you might see that sometimes you're doing sequencing for entertainment and for stimulation, and because it's fun, funky, creative, and it's artistic, rather than it's very purposefully sequenced and laid out in a way to help my students connect deeper with themselves. You know, I had a really interesting conversation, and I've had this conversation with quite a few teachers, where a teacher that I was mentoring had mentioned that she really likes to add in a little bit of everything in her class. While I can totally understand why we want to do that, it makes sense, right? Like, let's tick all the boxes. But when you think about a class, generally it's an hour, maybe a little bit longer, it might be a little bit shorter. When we think about that, if we are so focused on trying to get everything and tick all the boxes, which, bear in mind, I understand that some styles and some studios will require you to include certain things in your sequencing. If we are focused on trying to tick all the boxes, it's kind of like being a jack of all trades and a master of none. It doesn't really allow your students to, first of all, properly prepare for all of the things, all of the boxes that you want to tick if you're trying to go, I'm going to target every single thing in the body. But it kind of just lets your students like dip their toe in a little bit and then pull away, because there's just realistically, as I said, the class length, there's not enough time to purposefully really get into every little detail and component and ways of inviting and preparing the body for all of the boxes that you want to tick. It is just impossible to do. You will not be able to do it unless you have a class that's like hours and hours long. So when I did share this kind of perspective with this teacher, and when I have shared this with other teachers that I've had conversations with and mentored, there was a shift. There was a consideration. And within that consideration, there was then more of a purpose-driven sequencing that happened on her part. Now, we all have different ideas and different gifts as teachers to be able to bring. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't offer a sequence and a class for your students that doesn't tick all these boxes. However, just bear in mind the fact that it is very difficult to actually really deeply invite your students and properly prepare them for all of these things that you think are necessary for them to be able to target in their body in the short time frame that we generally have when we teach a group class. So again, this really comes back to your personal motivation, your intention, your why. Why am I sequencing something the way that I am? What is it that I'm trying to achieve with my sequencing? There needs to be purpose. There needs to be contextual ideas that inform your sequencing. And this is a blueprint that I have used to really empower my students and to empower myself and those teachers that I have mentored to provide a class that automatically, inherently has so much variety. And the reason is because when I sequence for purpose, for the purposes of preparing my students, progressively, gradually inviting them into asana and providing a platform and a space for them to actually explore, to be able to discover what it is that works for them. When I can do that, I see that there is a massive difference in the variety of what I have to offer. So tomorrow I'm going to be sharing with you how I bring that variety, which is honestly, it is such a simple approach, one that you can implement straight away. It is not complex at all. It is so easy to do, and I'm really excited to share that with you. So thank you for tuning in to today's video, and I look forward to seeing you in tomorrow's.